The afternoon sun cast long shadows across downtown Plaza as Staff Sergeant James Mitchell sat alone at the outdoor coffee shop. 3 days had passed since his return from Afghanistan, and the busy civilian world still felt strange to him. The plaza buzzed with activity, children laughing, teenagers taking selfies, and business people hurrying through their lunch breaks. But to Mitchell, it all seemed to move in slow motion. His calloused hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup, steam rising gently into the cool autumn air. At 32 years old, Mitchell looked older than his age, his face weathered by 3 tours of duty and countless missions that would never make it into any history books. His dark hair was still cut military short, and his posture remained ramrod straight even in the casual metal chair. Old habits died hard. Every few minutes, Mitchell's eyes would scan the crowd, analyzing faces and movements. He couldn't help but notice the exits, the elevated positions, and the blind spots around corners. The military had trained him too well to ever fully relax in public spaces. But he was trying. That's why he chose to sit here today, forcing himself to rejoin the world he'd fought to protect. A young waitress approached his table, her name tag reading Sarah. She smiled warmly, holding up a coffee pot. "Would you like a refill, sir?" Mitchell nodded, managing a small smile. "Thank you, ma'am." His voice was deep but quiet, the kind that commanded respect without having to raise its volume. As Sarah poured the coffee, she noticed the small eagle tattoo on his forearm, the symbol of his unit. "Were you in the military?" she asked, genuine interest in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. Just got back," Mitchell replied, leaving out the details of where he'd been and what he'd done. Some things were better left unsaid. The plaza's atmosphere shifted as the lunch crowd began to thin out. Mitchell checked his watch. 2:30 p.m. The quiet afternoon hours were setting in, his favorite time of day. An elderly man pushing a small cart full of newspapers and magazines caught his attention. The vendor moved slowly, carefully arranging his merchandise at a corner spot near the fountain. Mitchell watched as a young mother struggled to control 2 energetic boys near the fountain. The kids were fascinated by the water, trying their best to climb the fountain's edge despite their mother's protests. Without thinking, Mitchell's hand tightened around his coffee cup. The fountain's wide basin reminded him too much of the water features in Kandahar where insurgents sometimes hid explosives. He shook his head, forcing the memories away. This was downtown America, not a war zone. The only danger these kids faced was getting their clothes wet and facing their mother's disapproval. A street musician set up nearby, the gentle notes of an acoustic guitar floating through the air. Mitchell found himself focusing on the music, using it to ground himself in the present moment. A technique his VA counselor had taught him. The familiar melody of Sweet Home Alabama helped ease some of the tension in his shoulders. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his sister Jenny. "Don't forget dinner at Mom's tonight, 6 p.m. sharp." Mitchell smiled. His family had barely let him out of their sight since he'd returned. After 15 years of military service, they were hoping he'd finally settle down in his hometown. Maybe they were right. The army had been his life since he'd enlisted at 18, following in his father's footsteps. But now, approaching his mid-30s, Mitchell felt the pull of something different. Not softer, nothing about him was soft, but perhaps more grounded. A cool breeze rustled through the plaza's decorative trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and fresh-baked pretzels from the nearby stand. Mitchell took another sip of his coffee, appreciating the simple pleasure of a peaceful afternoon. His tactical awareness remained sharp. He noticed the security guard making his rounds, the teenager who passed by his table 3 times while talking on his phone, and the delivery truck that had been parked a bit too long in the loading zone. But for the first time in months, he allowed himself to relax slightly. The familiar weight of his dog tags pressed against his chest under his plain black t-shirt, a reminder of who he was and what he'd done. But here, in this moment, he was just another face in the crowd, trying to find his place in a world that moved at a different pace than the one he'd left behind. Little did Mitchell know that this peaceful afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would remind him that sometimes the skills learned in war have their place in times of peace too. The peaceful atmosphere at downtown Plaza shattered like glass when the deep rumble of motorcycle engines filled the air. 5 heavy bikes roared into the plaza's parking area, their engines unnecessarily loud and aggressive. Mitchell's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth as his trained eyes assessed the new arrivals. The bikers parked their motorcycles across 3 spaces, showing no regard for the clearly marked lines. Their leader, a massive man standing well over 6 feet tall with a thick beard and tattooed arms, swung his leg over his chrome-covered Harley. His leather vest displayed patches that Mitchell recognized, not from any respected motorcycle club, but from a group known for causing trouble in neighboring towns. "Look what we have here, boys," the leader's voice boomed across the plaza. "Seems like a nice quiet afternoon." He laughed, and his followers joined in, their voices carrying a clear threat that made several nearby shoppers hurry away. The other 4 bikers dismounted, each one looking like they'd stepped out of a bad movie about motorcycle gangs. The smallest of them was still larger than average, with a bandana covering his head and dark sunglasses hiding his eyes. 2 others wore matching leather vests covered in patches and pins, while the fourth had arms completely covered in tattoos and carried a heavy chain wrapped around his waist like a belt. Sarah, the waitress who had been so kind to Mitchell earlier, quickly moved inside the coffee shop, pulling a young busboy with her. Other Plaza visitors began to move away from the area, parents grabbing their children's hands, teenagers stopping their selfies, and business people clutching their briefcases tighter as they hurried past. Mitchell remained perfectly still, his military training kicking in as he observed every detail. The leader had a slight limp in his right leg, an old injury perhaps. 2 of the bikers kept touching their right sides, suggesting concealed weapons. The one with the chain had his shoelaces untied, a detail that could matter in a confrontation. The smallest one seemed nervous, constantly looking around, likely the newest member of their group. "Hey, princess," the leader shouted at a young woman who was trying to walk quickly past them. "Why don't you come hang out with real men?" His friends laughed again, their voices echoing off the plaza walls. The woman quickened her pace, her face flushed with fear and embarrassment. The bikers watched her go, making crude comments that made Mitchell's jaw tighten. He set his coffee cup down slowly, his fingers flexing unconsciously. The elderly vendor with his newspaper cart caught the biker's attention next. The leader nudged one of his friends, pointing at the old man with a wicked grin. "Check out Grandpa over there. Bet he's got some cash in that little box of his." Mitchell watched as the group began moving toward the vendor, their boots heavy on the plaza's brick pavement. The old man noticed them coming and began to hurriedly pack up his magazines, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to close his cash box. The plaza's security guard, a young man probably in his early 20s, stood frozen near the fountain, speaking urgently into his radio. Mitchell could tell from the guard's stance that he had no real training for situations like this. The kid was doing the right thing by calling for backup, but help would take time to arrive. 2 of the bikers broke off from their group, moving to flank the vendor's cart while pretending to look at magazines. The leader and his remaining followers approached from the front, creating a half circle that trapped the old man against the plaza wall. "Nice little business you got here, old-timer," the leader said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. He picked up a magazine, deliberately dropping it to the ground. "Oops. Seems like you're having trouble keeping your merchandise organized." The vendor, despite his fear, stood his ground. "Please, I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice steady despite his age. Mitchell noticed the veteran's pin on the old man's jacket, Vietnam era. The vendor wasn't just any senior citizen, he was someone who had seen combat himself long ago. As the tension built, other plaza visitors watched from a safe distance, many recording with their phones, but none stepping forward to help. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as the bikers moved closer to the vendor, their intentions clear to everyone watching. Mitchell pushed his chair back from the table slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. Years of combat experience had taught him when a situation was about to explode. That moment was coming fast, and he knew that once again, he would have to make a choice between walking away or standing up against something wrong. The situation at downtown Plaza deteriorated quickly as the bikers surrounded the elderly vendor's cart. The leader, enjoying his moment of power, knocked over a stack of magazines with a sweep of his arm. Glossy pages scattered across the brick pavement, some landing in puddles from the nearby fountain. "Look what you did," the leader sneered, jabbing his finger at the vendor's chest. "Your stuff is making a mess of our plaza. That's gonna cost you." His followers laughed on cue, moving closer to block any escape routes for the old man. The vendor, who wore a name tag reading Frank Thompson, stood as straight as his aged back would allow. His weathered hands gripped his cart's handle tightly, his Vietnam veteran's pin gleaming under the afternoon sun. I've been selling papers here for 15 years, he said firmly. This plaza belongs to everyone. Mitchell watched as the biker with the chain unwrapped it from his waist, letting it dangle threateningly. The smallest biker was now going through the fallen magazines, deliberately stepping on them with his muddy boots. The other two moved behind the cart, one of them opening the cash box while Frank was distracted by their leader. 15 years? The leader mocked, leaning in close to Frank's face. Well, times change, old man. From now on, you want to sell here, you pay us. Call it insurance. He grinned, revealing a gold tooth that caught the sunlight. Because accidents happen, don't they, boys? To demonstrate his point, one of the bikers pushed the cart hard. Frank tried to hold on, but his grip slipped. The cart tipped over with a crash, sending newspapers, magazines, and coins rolling across the plaza floor. The old man stumbled but managed to stay on his feet, his face red with anger and humiliation. The plaza had become eerily quiet. The street musician had stopped playing, his guitar hanging limply at his side. Parents held their children close, hurrying them away from the scene. Sarah, the waitress, stood in the coffee shop doorway, her phone in her hand, clearly calling for help. But the nearest police station was 10 minutes away. A lot could happen in 10 minutes. Mitchell rose from his chair, his movements smooth and deliberate. He'd seen enough. As he stepped away from his table, he mentally noted the positions of all 5 bikers. The leader and the chain wielder were the primary threats. The nervous one would likely run. The 2 by the cash box were interested in money, not fighting. They'd hesitate in a confrontation. Look what you've done now, the leader said to Frank, kicking some magazines aside. All this mess, someone could slip and fall, someone could get hurt. He reached out and grabbed Frank's veteran's pin, ripping it from his jacket. What's this? You think being some old soldier makes you tough? Frank's eyes hardened at the desecration of his pin. I served my country, he said, his voice carrying the strength of a man who had seen real combat. Unlike some who just pretend to be tough by picking on old men. The leader's face darkened with rage. He grabbed Frank's shirt collar, pulling back his other hand in a fist. Let me show you how tough I am, you old. That's one hell of a mess you've made. Mitchell's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood just a few feet away, his posture relaxed but his eyes intensely focused. The plaza went even quieter, if that was possible. Even the fountain splashing seemed muted. The leader turned slowly, keeping his grip on Frank's collar. Mind your own business, buddy, he growled. Unless you want to get hurt. Mitchell's face showed no emotion, but his eyes tracked every movement around him. He noticed the chain wielder adjusting his grip, the nervous one backing up slightly, the 2 by the cash box standing straighter, trying to look threatening. See, that's the problem, Mitchell said calmly. This is my business. Right now, your friend there is holding a U.S. military veteran. That pin you just ripped off? It means he fought in Vietnam, and I got a real problem with people who disrespect veterans. The leader's eyes narrowed as he studied Mitchell more carefully, perhaps finally noticing his military bearing, his controlled stance, the way his eyes never stopped moving, assessing threats. But pride and anger overshadowed his judgment. Well then, the leader snarled, shoving Frank aside roughly. Looks like we got ourselves 2 tough guys to deal with. Boys, show this hero what we think about people who stick their noses where they don't belong. Time seemed to slow down as Mitchell stood facing the 5 bikers. The leader released Frank, shoving the elderly veteran aside. Frank stumbled but caught himself against the wall, his eyes moving between Mitchell and the bikers with concern. You made a big mistake, friend, the leader said, cracking his knuckles as he stepped toward Mitchell. 5 of us, 1 of you. Bad math, don't you think? Mitchell remained perfectly still, his face calm. His eyes, however, never stopped moving, tracking each potential threat. He noticed how the biker with the chain was trying to circle behind him. The nervous one had backed up even further, while the 2 who had been rifling through the cash box were spreading out to his left. Actually, Mitchell replied quietly, the math works just fine. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had faced far worse odds in much more dangerous places. Last chance. Pick up the magazines, return what you took, and leave. The leader laughed, but Mitchell noticed it was forced. Something in Mitchell's calm demeanor had finally started to make him uneasy. Boys, the leader called out, teach this hero a lesson. The chain wielder moved first, swinging his heavy chain in a wide arc aimed at Mitchell's head. To the crowd watching, what happened next seemed impossible. Mitchell stepped inside the chain's arc with fluid grace, caught the chain mid-swing, and yanked hard. The biker, not expecting such strength, stumbled forward off balance. In one smooth motion, Mitchell wrapped the chain around the biker's extended arm and pulled down sharply. The man face planted into the plaza's brick pavement with a surprised grunt, the chain clattering beside him. 4, Mitchell said calmly. The two bikers from the cash box charged together, thinking to overwhelm him with numbers. Mitchell sidestepped the first punch, deflecting it past his shoulder. Using his attacker's momentum, he guided the man straight into his partner. Both bikers collided hard and sprawled to the ground. 2, Mitchell counted, still not having thrown a single punch. The nervous biker, seeing 3 of his friends taken down in seconds, turned and ran. His boots squeaked against the pavement as he fled toward their motorcycles. 1, Mitchell said, focusing his full attention on the leader. The crowd that had gathered at a safe distance gasped and murmured. Several phones were recording everything. Sarah, still in the coffee shop doorway, was grinning now. Frank stood straighter, a look of satisfaction crossing his weathered face. The leader's face had turned red with rage and embarrassment. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" he snarled, pulling out a switchblade from his pocket. The blade snapped open with a metallic click. "Let's see how tough you are now." Mitchell's expression didn't change, but his stance shifted slightly. "Bringing a knife to a fist fight," he said. "That tells me everything I need to know about you." The leader lunged forward, slashing wildly with the knife. Mitchell moved like water, each slash missing him by inches. The leader grew more frustrated with each failed attack, his movements becoming more erratic and predictable. "Stand still," the leader shouted, sweat now visible on his forehead. "Like this?" Mitchell asked, suddenly stopping. Before the leader could react, Mitchell's hand shot out, grabbing the knife hand at the wrist. His grip was like iron, trained by years of close combat instruction. The leader's eyes widened in shock as he found himself unable to move his arm. He tried to punch with his free hand, but Mitchell blocked it with his forearm. In one swift motion, Mitchell twisted the knife hand while simultaneously sweeping the leader's legs. The large man went down hard, landing flat on his back. The knife clattered away across the pavement. Mitchell maintained his grip on the leader's wrist, applying just enough pressure to make his point clear. "Now," Mitchell said quietly, looking down at the shocked biker, "we're going to have a civilized conversation about respect, about treating veterans properly, and about finding a new place to spend your afternoons. Understand?" The leader, all his bravado gone, nodded quickly. His friends were slowly getting up, nursing various injuries and bruised egos. None of them seemed eager to continue the fight. In the distance, police sirens could finally be heard approaching the plaza. Mitchell's eyes never left the leader's face as he said, "Good. Let's start with picking up those magazines." 2 police cars pulled into downtown Plaza, their sirens fading as they parked. Mitchell maintained his hold on the biker leader, who remained on the ground, his face pressed against the brick pavement. The other bikers, except for the one who had run away, sat nearby, nursing their injuries and bruised pride. Officer Steve Martinez stepped out of the first police car, immediately assessing the scene before him. His partner, Officer Jenny Chen, moved to secure the perimeter, keeping the growing crowd of onlookers at a safe distance. Both officers had their hands near their weapons but hadn't drawn them, sensing the situation was already under control. "Afternoon, officers," Mitchell called out calmly, still holding the leader in a practiced restraint hold. "Glad you could join us." Officer Martinez approached carefully, taking in the scattered magazines, the overturned cart, and the various bikers sitting or lying on the ground. "Want to tell me what happened here?" he asked, pulling out his notepad. Before Mitchell could answer, Sarah from the coffee shop stepped forward. "I recorded everything on my phone," she said, holding up her device. "These men were harassing Mr. Thompson and tried to extort money from him. This gentleman," she pointed to Mitchell, stepped in to help, and they attacked him with a chain and a knife. Frank Thompson, the elderly vendor, moved forward as well, his voice steady despite his earlier ordeal. "That's right, officer. They destroyed my merchandise and tried to force me to pay them protection money. This young man protected me when no one else would." Other witnesses began speaking up. several offering their phone recordings as evidence. Officer Chen collected their contact information while Martinez knelt beside the biker leader. "Found this, Steve," Officer Chen called out, picking up the switchblade from where it had fallen. She secured it in an evidence bag, along with the chain that lay nearby. Mitchell finally released his hold on the leader, stepping back smoothly as Officer Martinez took control. The biker groaned as he was helped to his feet and handcuffed. "You're that Special Forces guy, aren't you?" Martinez asked Mitchell while securing the cuffs. "The one who just moved back to town?" Mitchell nodded slightly. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell, recently returned from Afghanistan. The leader's face paled slightly at this information. His remaining gang members looked even more uncomfortable, realizing they had picked a fight with a trained combat veteran. More police cars arrived, along with a small crowd of reporters attracted by the social media buzz that was already spreading. Phone videos of the incident were being shared rapidly online, showing how Mitchell had handled the situation with minimal force and maximum efficiency. "You're lucky, you know," Officer Martinez said to the handcuffed leader as he led him toward a police car. "If he wanted to, he could have done a lot worse." The other bikers were also handcuffed and placed in separate police cars. Officer Chen was taking statements from witnesses, while other officers began photographing the scene and collecting evidence. Mitchell turned his attention to Frank, who was trying to gather his scattered merchandise. Without a word, he began helping the elderly veteran pick up magazines and newspapers. Others from the crowd joined in, including Sarah and several teenagers who had recorded the incident. "You didn't have to do that, son," Frank said quietly as they worked. "But I'm glad you did. Reminded me of some guys I served with in Nam, always standing up for what's right." Mitchell smiled slightly, straightening a stack of magazines. "We take care of our own, sir, past and present." Sarah brought over Mitchell's abandoned coffee cup, now filled with fresh hot coffee. "On the house," she said with a warm smile, "though I think you'll be drinking free in this plaza for a long time." The plaza was returning to normal, though now filled with excited chatter about what had happened. Parents were telling their children about standing up to bullies, while several veterans who had witnessed the incident nodded approvingly at Mitchell. Officer Martinez returned after securing the prisoners. "We'll need an official statement from you," he said to Mitchell, "but it can wait until tomorrow if you'd like. Everything's pretty clear from the videos, and we got multiple witnesses." Mitchell nodded, still helping Frank reorganize his cart. The elderly vendor's veteran's pin, which had been torn off earlier, lay bent on the ground. Mitchell picked it up carefully. "Sir," he said, holding out the pin to Frank, "I think this belongs to you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to hear some of your stories from Vietnam while we finish cleaning up." As the excitement at downtown Plaza began to settle, local news vans started arriving. Reporters with microphones and camera crews rushed toward the scene, drawn by the viral videos already circulating on social media. Mitchell noticed them approaching and quietly stepped behind Frank's restored newsstand, avoiding the attention. "Mr. Thompson," called out a young female reporter from Channel 7 News. "Can you tell us what happened here today?" Frank stood proudly beside his cart, now fully restocked thanks to Mitchell and the helpful crowd. His veteran's pin, though slightly bent, was back on his jacket. "Just saw a fellow veteran showing these troublemakers that downtown Plaza belongs to everyone," he said with a smile. The reporter persisted, holding out her microphone. "We've seen the videos online. The man who helped you use military tactics. Do you know who he is?" Before Frank could answer, Officer Martinez stepped in. "We're still conducting our investigation," he said professionally. "We'll hold a press conference at the station later today." Sarah, still watching from the coffee shop doorway, caught Mitchell's eye and gestured toward the back entrance. Understanding her signal, he quietly slipped away from the growing media circus, entering the coffee shop through the rear door. "Not a fan of cameras?" Sarah asked as she led him to a quiet corner table away from the windows. Mitchell shook his head, settling into the chair. "Prefer to stay out of the spotlight. Did enough of that during military press briefings." Sarah brought him a fresh cup of coffee and a plate of sandwiches. "On the house," she insisted when he reached for his wallet. "Though I should warn you, you're probably going to be famous anyway. Those videos are everywhere." As if to prove her point, both their phones buzzed with news alerts. The incident was already trending on social media, with headlines like "Soldier Teaches Biker Gang a Lesson" and "Military Hero Defends Elderly Veteran." Mitchell sighed, checking his phone messages. There were dozens of missed calls and texts from family and friends who had recognized him in the videos. His sister Jenny had sent several excited messages. "OMG, you're viral. Mom's freaking out. Call us." Outside, the crowd had grown larger as word spread. People were taking selfies near where the confrontation had happened, and Frank was doing his best to handle the sudden attention. His newspaper sales had never been better, with people buying copies just to have him sign them. Officer Chen entered the coffee shop, spotting Mitchell in the corner. She walked over, notepad in hand. "Sorry to disturb you, Sergeant, but I need your official statement now. There's also something else you should know." Mitchell gestured for her to sit down. Sarah brought over a coffee for the officer as well, the leader of the group. Officer Chen continued, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Turns out he's wanted in 3 counties for similar extortion attempts. You helped us catch someone we've been after for months." Mitchell listened as she explained how the biker gang had been terrorizing small businesses across the state, usually targeting elderly or vulnerable owners. They'd been careful to stay ahead of law enforcement, never staying in one place too long. "The DA wants to talk to you," Officer Chen added. "These videos will help build a solid case against them. We got multiple witnesses, clear footage of assault with a deadly weapon, attempted extortion. They're looking at serious time." As they finished the paperwork, Mitchell's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his old commanding officer. "Saw the videos. Still taking care of business, I see. Well done, soldier." Sarah, who had been managing the growing crowd of curious customers, returned to their table. "You should see social media right now," she said excitedly. "People are calling you the Plaza Protector. There's even a hashtag." Mitchell couldn't help but smile slightly at the absurdity of it all. He had spent years conducting classified missions in some of the world's most dangerous places, yet here he was, becoming famous for stopping a few troublemakers in his hometown Plaza. "Think they'll come back?" Sarah asked, glancing outside where the media circus continued. Officer Chen shook her head. "Not them specifically. They'll be busy with the justice system for a while, but their friends might want revenge." "Let them come," Mitchell said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Some people only learn respect the hard way, and I'll be here, having my coffee, ready to teach that lesson again if necessary." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the coffee shop windows as Mitchell finished giving his statement. Outside, life at downtown Plaza was returning to normal, but something had changed. The place felt safer, as if the incident had reminded everyone that sometimes one person standing up could make all the difference. The next morning, downtown Plaza looked different. News of yesterday's incident had spread far beyond the local community. Mitchell arrived at his usual time for coffee, only to find the plaza buzzing with unusual activity. Security guards, newly hired by the plaza management, patrolled the area in crisp uniforms. Shop owners nodded respectfully as he passed, and several people stopped to shake his hand. Frank's newspaper stand had transformed overnight. A new, sturdy cart replaced his old one, a gift from grateful plaza shop owners. A small American flag and a Marine Corps flag now flew from either side, honoring his Vietnam service. A line of customers waited patiently, many buying papers just for a chance to talk with the elderly veteran. "There he is," Frank called out warmly as Mitchell approached. "My fellow soldier. Come, come, I got something to show you." Mitchell walked over, noticing the plaza was significantly cleaner than usual. The maintenance staff had worked overtime, inspired by yesterday's events to make the space more welcoming. Even the fountain seemed to sparkle more brightly in the morning sun. Frank reached under his cart and pulled out a framed newspaper. It was today's edition of the local paper, featuring a large photo of Mitchell helping Frank pick up his scattered magazines. The headline read, "Local hero stands up to plaza bullies. Special Forces veteran protects one of his own." "They got your picture despite your best efforts to avoid the cameras," Frank chuckled, handing Mitchell a frame. "The reporter interviewed me for 2 hours. I hope you don't mind, but I told them a bit about what you did." Mitchell examined the article, his expression remaining neutral. The story was surprisingly accurate, focusing not just on the fight, but on the larger issue of community protection and veteran solidarity. There was even a sidebar about Frank's own military service in Vietnam. Sarah appeared with Mitchell's usual coffee order, adding a fresh bagel on the plate. "You're famous now," she said with a grin. "We've had people coming in all morning asking if this is where the soldier hero gets his coffee." As if to prove her point, a young boy about 10 years old approached them, his father standing proudly behind him. The boy held up a small notebook. "Sir," the boy said nervously, "I'm doing a school report on heroes in our community. Would you sign this for me?" Mitchell looked at the boy, then at his father, who nodded encouragingly. With a slight smile, he took the notebook and signed it, adding a small note. "Stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." The boy's face lit up as he read the message. "Dad, did you see? He wrote me a message." More Plaza visitors gathered around, but they maintained a respectful distance, sensing Mitchell's discomfort with too much attention. Officer Martinez appeared, carrying a box of donuts. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, setting the box down on Frank's cart. "Got some news you might want to hear." Mitchell listened as Martinez explained that the biker gang's leader had agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he was providing information about other criminal activities in the area. The nervous biker who had run away had turned himself in last night, offering to testify against his former friends. "The DA's office sends their thanks," Martinez added. "This case is helping them break up several criminal operations we've been tracking for months." As they talked, a group of veterans from the local VFW post arrived. They had seen the news and wanted to meet both Mitchell and Frank. Soon, stories of service from different eras were being shared: Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, Iraq. Despite the age gaps, there was an unmistakable bond among them. "You know what the best part is," Frank said, gesturing around the plaza. "Look at how people are acting now. Parents letting their kids play by the fountain. Elderly folks sitting on benches without fear. This place feels like a community again." Mitchell observed the scene, noting the truth in Frank's words. The plaza had transformed from a space people hurried through to one where they lingered and chatted. Even the street musician had returned, his guitar music adding a peaceful backdrop to the morning bustle. Sarah brought more coffee for everyone, and the impromptu gathering continued. Veterans swapped stories, plaza regulars shared their accounts of yesterday's events, and children listened wide-eyed to tales of bravery from different generations. Sometimes, Frank said quietly to Mitchell, "It takes one person doing the right thing to remind everyone else that they can do it too." Mitchell nodded, sipping his coffee as the morning sun warmed the plaza. He had spent years fighting in far-off places, but here, in his hometown plaza, he had perhaps won his most important victory, helping a community find its courage again. A week after the incident at downtown Plaza, Mitchell found himself in an unexpected position. The mayor's office had organized a small ceremony to honor his actions, despite his initial reluctance. The plaza was decorated with American flags, and chairs had been set up near the fountain where the confrontation had taken place. Mitchell sat uncomfortably in the front row, wearing his military dress uniform at the mayor's request. His family sat beside him, his proud mother wiping tears occasionally, his sister Jenny beaming, and his father, also a veteran, sitting straight-backed with a knowing smile. "You clean up nice," Sarah teased as she brought coffee for Mitchell and his family. She had taken the morning off from the coffee shop to attend the ceremony. Like many plaza regulars, she now considered Mitchell a friend rather than just a customer. Frank's newspaper stand had the best view of the makeshift stage. He had closed it for the ceremony, but stood nearby in his own pressed Vietnam-era uniform, his previously bent veteran's pin now carefully restored and gleaming on his chest. Mayor Thompson, no relation to Frank, stepped up to the microphone. "A week ago," she began, "this plaza was reminded of something important. We were reminded that heroes don't just exist in war zones or history books. Sometimes they're right here among us, quietly having their morning coffee." The crowd chuckled, and Mitchell shifted in his chair. He had faced enemy fire with less discomfort than he felt being the center of attention. "But today isn't just about one act of bravery," the mayor continued. "It's about what happened afterward. Since last week, our community has changed. Local businesses report that crime is down. Volunteers have started a Plaza Watch program. Senior citizens say they feel safer. Young people are signing up for self-defense classes." Officer Martinez, standing at the back in his dress uniform, nodded in agreement. His department had noticed the changes too. The plaza had become a model for community policing, with citizens and law enforcement working together. The mayor held up a key to the city. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell didn't just stop some troublemakers. He reminded us that we all have a responsibility to our community, that standing up for what's right isn't just for soldiers, it's for everyone. As Mitchell reluctantly walked up to accept the key, something caught his attention. A group of motorcycle engines could be heard approaching the plaza. The crowd tensed, and several police officers moved toward the sound. But these weren't the same kind of bikers as before. Instead, a group of veterans on motorcycles from the American Legion riders rolled in, their bikes gleaming and decorated with American flags. They parked in formation and walked to the ceremony in their leather vests covered with military patches. Their leader, a gray-haired Vietnam veteran, approached the stage. "Hope we're not interrupting," he said into the microphone. "We heard about what happened here. Rode down from 3 states away to show our support." Mitchell recognized their patches. These were men and women who had served, who spent their retirement years supporting veterans' causes and protecting their communities. They spread out through the crowd, sharing stories with local veterans and citizens alike. The ceremony continued, but now it had evolved into something more, a celebration of community and service. The Legion riders presented Frank with a new veteran's pin, this one marking him as an honorary member of their group. They offered Mitchell membership too, though they understood when he said he preferred his quiet morning coffee routine. Local business owners took turns speaking about the changes they'd seen. The owner of the coffee shop announced they were naming a drink after Mitchell, though he politely asked them not to. A martial arts instructor offered free classes to seniors. The plaza management unveiled plans for improved lighting and security cameras. "See what you started?" Frank said to Mitchell as they watched the plaza fill with people sharing stories and making plans. "One small stand against bullies, and look how it spread." Mitchell's father leaned in. "That's how it works, son. Sometimes the biggest battles we win aren't the ones with guns and tanks. They're the ones that remind people of their own strength." As the ceremony wound down, the Legion riders fired up their bikes for a parade lap around the plaza. Children waved flags, veterans saluted, and the morning sun caught the chrome of their motorcycles. The sound was different from the aggressive roar of the troublemakers. This was a rumble of respect, a brotherhood, of protection. Mitchell stood with his family, watching the scene unfold. A week ago, he had just wanted to enjoy his morning coffee in peace. Now he had accidentally helped create something bigger, a reminder that communities become stronger when people look out for each other. 2 weeks after the ceremony, life at downtown Plaza had found a new normal. Mitchell sat at his usual table outside the coffee shop, but things were different now. The plaza had transformed into a model of community spirit, though not in the way he had expected. Early morning sunlight sparkled off the fountain as Frank opened his newspaper stand, now upgraded with a small awning that proudly displayed both American and POW/MEA flags. Several veterans from different eras gathered there each morning, sharing coffee and stories. They called themselves the Plaza Patriots, though Mitchell politely declined their attempts to make him their official leader. "Morning, Sergeant," called Officer Chen as she walked past on her new foot patrol route. The police department had reorganized their coverage of the area, making sure officers spent time walking through the plaza rather than just driving by. They knew most regulars by name now, creating a stronger bond between law enforcement and the community. Sarah brought out Mitchell's usual coffee order, along with a fresh muffin. "You got to try these," she said. "My grandmother's recipe. She started baking for the coffee shop after you helped organize the veterans' breakfast last week." Mitchell nodded in thanks, remembering how that simple breakfast meeting had grown into something special. What started as a few veterans sharing meals had evolved into a weekly gathering where they helped other vets navigate VA benefits, find jobs, or just talk about their experiences. A group of teenagers walked by, heading to the new self-defense class that had started in the plaza's community center. The instructor, a former Marine, had approached Mitchell after the incident, asking for help designing a program that taught not just fighting skills, but responsibility and community awareness. "Mr. Mitchell," called one of the teens, waving. "We used that technique you showed us yesterday, the one about being aware of your surroundings." Tommy noticed someone trying to steal Mrs. Johnson's purse and called the police before anything happened. Mitchell gave them a thumbs up, proud of how the young people had embraced the lessons. They weren't learning to fight, they were learning to protect, to prevent trouble before it started, to look out for their neighbors. The plaza's transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. News stations from larger cities had done features on how one incident had sparked a community-wide change. Business owners reported more customers, feeling safer with the increased community presence. Senior citizens no longer hurried through their errands but stopped to chat on newly installed benches. Frank walked over to Mitchell's table, carrying a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" he asked, pointing to an article. "They're using our plaza as a model for other communities. People are starting similar programs in their own neighborhoods." The article described how other towns were implementing what they called the Plaza Protocol, combining community policing, veteran support groups, youth programs, and business cooperation to create safer public spaces. A familiar rumble of motorcycles approached, but nobody tensed up anymore. The American Legion riders had made the plaza a regular stop on their weekend routes, often bringing supplies for veteran outreach programs or just stopping to share stories over coffee. "Never thought I'd say this," Sarah commented as she refreshed Mitchell's coffee, "but that sound makes me feel safer now. Funny how things change." Mitchell watched as 3 Legion riders parked their bikes. Among them was the former nervous member of the troublemaker gang who had turned his life around after the incident. He had discovered his own grandfather was a veteran and now rode with the Legion, helping other young people avoid the mistakes he'd made. "You know what's really amazing?" Frank said, settling into a chair at Mitchell's table. "It's not just about stopping bad guys anymore. Yesterday, I saw those kids from the self-defense class helping an elderly lady with her groceries. The coffee shop organized a meal program for homebound veterans. Even the street musicians started teaching free guitar lessons to at-risk youth." Mitchell listened as Frank continued describing the changes. The plaza had become more than just a public space, it was a community in the truest sense. People watched out for each other, supported each other, protected each other. "All this from one morning when you decided not to look away," Frank mused, gazing around the plaza. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest decisions." Mitchell sipped his coffee, watching the plaza come to life around him. He hadn't set out to be a hero or start a movement. He'd just done what felt right, what his military training and personal code had taught him to do. But sometimes that's all it takes. One person doing the right thing at the right moment, inspiring others to find their own courage. 1 month after the incident that changed downtown Plaza forever, Mitchell arrived for his morning coffee to find something unusual. The plaza was decorated with banners and flags, and a small crowd had gathered despite the early hour. A sign hung over the coffee shop entrance: "Plaza Community 1-month celebration." "Surprise," Sarah called out, holding his usual coffee order. "Don't worry," she added, seeing his slight frown, "we didn't plan any speeches this time. Just the community wanting to celebrate together." Mitchell relaxed a bit, taking his coffee and heading to his regular table. From there, he could observe the entire plaza, a habit he'd never lose from his military days. But what he saw now was very different from a month ago. Frank's newspaper stand had become an unofficial community information center. The elderly veteran was there as usual, but now his cart displayed not just newspapers and magazines, but also flyers for community events, veteran support services, and youth programs. A young man, the former nervous biker, was helping him set up for the day. "Can you believe how much has changed?" the young man asked Frank. "A month ago, I was running with the wrong crowd. Now I'm helping organize the Plaza Veterans Support Group." He touched the American Legion patch on his jacket proudly. Officer Martinez and Officer Chen walked through the plaza, stopping to chat with shop owners and early morning visitors. They weren't just patrolling anymore, they were part of the community. Children ran up to give them high fives, and elderly residents greeted them by name. "Remember when people used to hurry through here, looking down at their phones?" Officer Chen asked Martinez. "Now they stop and talk, actually knowing their neighbors." The self-defense class students were setting up a demonstration area near the fountain. Their instructor, the former Marine, had them practicing not just protection techniques, but also conflict resolution and situation awareness. Mitchell had helped design the program, emphasizing that the best fight was the one you could avoid. "Mr. Mitchell," called one of the teenage students, "would you help us demonstrate that calm-down technique you showed us? The one you used when those bikers were here?" Mitchell nodded and walked over. As he showed them how to maintain composure under pressure, he noticed parents watching with approval. These kids weren't learning to be fighters, they were learning to be protectors of their community. The American Legion riders arrived, their bikes now a welcome sound in the plaza. They parked in formation, their chrome and flags gleaming in the morning sun. Among them were veterans from different eras, all united in their mission to support their community. "Look at this place," the Legion Riders leader said to Mitchell, gesturing around the plaza. "A month ago, it was just another public space. Now it's a model for other communities. We've had requests from 5 other towns wanting to start similar programs." Sarah brought out trays of muffins and coffee for everyone. The coffee shop had become more than just a business. It was a gathering place where people connected and looked out for each other. Even the tip jar had been converted into a fund for veteran support programs. Frank made his way to Mitchell's table, moving slower with age but standing prouder these days. "You know what the best part is?" he asked, settling into a chair. "It's not about you anymore. Don't get me wrong, you started this. But now it's about everyone. Every person who decides to help instead of look away, every kid who stands up to a bully, every neighbor who checks on an elderly resident." Mitchell understood what Frank meant. The plaza had found its own strength, its own voice. What he'd done was simply show them it was possible to stand up, to make a difference. As the morning progressed, more people arrived to celebrate. Shop owners who once kept to themselves now chatted with customers and neighbors. The street musician played with a group of students he'd been teaching. Veterans from different eras shared stories and support. "Sometimes," Frank said, watching the scene with satisfaction, "all it takes is one person showing courage to remind others of their own." Mitchell sipped his coffee, observing the community he'd unknowingly helped create. He hadn't set out to be a hero or start a movement. He'd just been a soldier who couldn't walk away from someone in need. But that simple act had sparked something larger, a reminder that every community has the power to protect its own, to stand up against wrong, to become something better. The morning sun rose higher over downtown Plaza, shining on a place that had transformed from a space people passed through to a community they were proud to call their own. And at his usual table, Mitchell allowed himself a small smile, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting battles, but from bringing people together.